This video was co-produced by survivors and church officers in 2024. This video is about the experiences of victims and survivors in participating in the Church of England. The video contains material which may be triggering. Please ensure you have support in place prior to watching it.
Shoots of Hope.
This is what the church is also about, children shouldn't be harmed, vulnerable people shouldn't be harmed in any society. And we are a church that has a church in every village, the Church of England. We need to work together. And I think that's a beauty of this group. If you go down the list, there's psychological abuse, children being witnessing domestic violence, and it's even more for LGBTQ people. It's a conversation not just for the church, it's for all organisations to come together.
How do survivors participate in the safeguarding work of the church?
Most recently, there's been a lot of work on the Seal of Confession. So quite a lot of survivors contributed to that. There was also 2 survivors on the actual working group. I was one.
The Seal of the Confessional refers to the confidentiality of what is disclosed during confession. A new working group was formed in the Church of England in 2022 to consider this practice in the light of the findings of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse.
There was another group of survivors of about 7, I think, that fed into the big group or the main group that you went to, and you sat on both. And that all their reflections that they wrote down are all in the report that went to the House of Bishops. One of the survivors in particular suggested that a way of getting hold of other survivors' opinions was to do a survey. And it was done quite quickly, but it was done simply in the words of the survivors, 4 questions that people were asked. And it went out via the newsletter, and we got back over 30 responses, which really felt it came from the survivors, so it felt like a good way of getting their views on the Seal of Confessional. And all their comments have gone into the report that went to the House of Bishops.
I'm on the local diocesan safeguarding committee. I was asked to be on it as a survivor. But it can be difficult because my husband was a vicar and we were married for 22 years and the violence and everything went on all that time. He doesn't know I'm doing any of this, but that's the bottom line. But I want to do it because, it gives hope and helps people, so I'm still doing it.
I've been involved in a couple of interview panels, one specifically where there were an awful lot of applications, 55 I believe. There was 3 of us that then met via Zoom to discuss what we thought of each application. And their focus was on good responses, on experience and things. And there was 2 candidates in particular that the other 2 people on the panel were very keen to have an interview for because they ticked all their boxes. But in the question around survivors, some of the things actually stood out to me as possibly dangerous and definitely not helpful. And when I highlighted that to the 2 professionals, they said, I can see what you mean. Yes, that would be concerning. But they hadn't seen it when they were reading through because it's not something that they're consciously aware of all the time. They weren't appropriate, they didn't get an interview.
I really loved the opportunity of being on the panel that chose Nasir Afzal because, he was a prosecutor. I really loved the diversity of the group. I think the welcomeness, Zoe, you did a lot, and that's the first connection that you have. And people from different faith backgrounds as well coming in. I think that's a huge relief.
I enjoyed an engagement that I had yesterday where I was involved in being videoed, interviewed with regards to my experience of domestic violence. And I've always felt that stories of domestic violence don't get told enough. Especially within the church, we talk a lot about child abuse and less about other forms of abuse.
The Interim Support Scheme provides support to survivors who need immediate and urgent help via panels who decide on individual cases.
I think the bravest I've seen is the way that when the interim support panel was set up, survivors were engaged on the panel. It was invaluable because it brought a very different trauma-informed perspective into the room when decisions were being made.
Safe Spaces is a free and independent support service for anyone who has been abused through their relationship with either the Church of England or the Catholic Church in England and Wales.
I was very pleased to sit on several panels with Safe Spaces Steering Committee, and it felt really empowering to be on those panels and to be able to say that just wouldn't work for survivors, or that possibly could if it was tweaked, or that looks amazing. So I've really valued those experiences.
The engagement is about improving the church and making it a safer place. Well, I think you do that by helping write policies. You do that by telling your story to a certain extent. But I mean, my abuse wasn't within the church, but I still think I have valid inputs into what a safe space feels like. Things are helpful to make sure abuse doesn't happen, or it can also be involved in training.
What are the challenges of survivor participation in the Church of England?
So I'd say, the main thing for me has been fear, which is not as bad as it used to be, thanks to, some of the movement we've had.
Sometimes what happens is there's re-traumatization of dealing with, and something can trigger you off. And so you need support and go back and come back in again.
My challenge, feels challenging for me, is I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to say the wrong thing to somebody. I don't want to trigger someone accidentally, and I know you can never know who you might trigger by what you're saying. I think that's my greatest fear when I go into working with survivors. I don't want people to feel patronised.
And because I'd been spiritually abused previously, trusting somebody else within the church was difficult. I just needed somebody, I think a combination of people, and somebody empathetic.
What I fear is reaching that level of burnout sometimes when I'm tired, where I can't be empathic. I can't really listen, or my response, it's a bit like Deb says about getting it wrong, but it's quite a deep getting it wrong where I'm deliberately protecting myself in some way because actually it's all too painful. And I worry about getting to that point because at that point I'm not properly able to engage and I can do more harm than good.
We are not using the same language sometimes. I think it's extraordinarily difficult for survivors to understand what the church is saying sometimes. I also think it's equally quite difficult for the church to understand what survivors are saying.
I think the challenge is as always, labels, and the solution is remove the label and see the person.
I would feel like better if in the past I'd been approached as a survivor rather than somebody who's, not okay. I don't like the word label, but being approached, as a survivor feels a step forward for me. Whereas like for some people, it doesn't, because we're all different. For some people, it doesn't. It's a really important part of how we identify, the words and how we own them and we reclaim those as well.
Sometimes you're happy, like in this group, to be known as a survivor, but you might want to keep that label away from other parts of your life. and that can be quite challenging sometimes. And so for me as a survivor, having control of my own decisions is the most important thing. Some staff can be guilty of wanting to do so much for you and to make you so comfortable that they treat you a little bit like you are a child or that you're not fully capable. And I find that really insulting.
At the moment, we can say that survivors have had a voice, but it doesn't guarantee that the outcome is what survivors want.
It needs to be all the way through, and you need to have survivors in some of your decision-making groups to say, well, that might work for a lot of people, but it might not work for survivors, or this might be difficult for survivors. So you may need to adjust the policy, things like that.
I don't disagree with your observation, and I think there's a conflict of power and an issue about having many roles. So I think I'd probably agree about intentional representation being really important. But we know that we have a significant number of survivors at every level. So in the House of Bishops, in the College of Bishops, in General Synod. So there really are survivors, many of whom have declared, not all, in the room. But of course, they're not sitting there only looking at things through that particular lens.
Everybody has an opinion about how to keep themselves safe. So when we put survivors in one side and the church on the other side, this binary thinking at the end doesn't benefit anyone. Because safeguarding is about everyone's responsibility.
I think trauma is completely organisation-wide. It doesn't just need to be a conversation about victims and survivors. It just needs to be a way to support each other. And if you go back to the faith, to love each other.
There's a real care and passion to be doing the right thing, but we don't always agree that what the right thing to do is the same thing. So that leads to friction and pain.
Survivors can have different opinions, and sometimes that can be quite challenging to challenge other survivors. I think that's really tricky because you don't want to take away from their experience, but then it is okay to have a different opinion. And then it's how that's managed when there's conflicting opinions.
The other thing which I think is quite important in the survivor engagement is that to listen to as many people as possible. Because each survivor story is unique. And the more people we listen to, the more people we're giving space, the better changes we can make. When you listen to many voices, you incorporate different lived experiences.
I can definitely see it as a challenge if you're only hearing from a very small number of survivors. If you've got a fairly large pool of survivors, you will get the majority of opinions.
There are voices that are not represented. The invitation's there, but it's too difficult. There are many voices who've been channeled into that process. There are other voices who are still out there who for whatever reason, they're not going to get heard.
I'm a wheelchair user and I have accessibility problems, I have health problems, I have seizures, and I have no problem filling in safety plans and telling people what I need. But when I was involved in one panel interviews, the venue was not wheelchair accessible. Now, when I addressed that with the staff, it was remedied. I end up feeling like a burden.
There are pockets, and there are pockets of optimism, and there are some shoots of hope. But I personally, I'm like a lot of survivors are still waiting for even what happened to be actually even acknowledged or recognised. Never mind like an apology. That's probably not going to happen.
The speed of change is sometimes not as quick as people want, and that process of change can take a long time, not just because of the nature of change, but the way the church is set up can be quite reactionary, and that's quite frustrating.
I was just told by a safeguarding officer that anything in the Church of England moves at a very slow snail's pace. And it does.
The church is getting better, but I think that there's still a lot of people that see safeguarding as a chore and see survivors as difficult. There's a reason then to step back a little. You've got to think of the safety of staff and of everybody else involved. But I don't think you need to close a door. Maybe you just need to open a different one.
What are the benefits of survivor participation in the Church of England?
I never interviewed anybody, and and it all seemed maybe a little bit out of my skill set. But the way I approached it I found it really, really educational to begin with. To see it from the other side, because we're usually being interviewed. So that was like the lens that I felt I brought to the panel.
So the lenses you bring the lenses of the service user.
Yes.
To be in that situation and to listen to the professionals on the panel as well, but also listening to the applicants, even if they weren't suitable. Very interesting. And I felt I was being listened to for once by the church.
I wasn't just there as a token person to say, we've had a survivor. I really was part of the process. So, no, I think it was very beneficial for me, but also hopefully for the church.
I really loved the opportunity of being on the panel that chose Nasir Afzal. It felt like a tipping point for me. It's like post-traumatic growth. So we were talking about mental health, spirituality and stuff like that. So it felt like amongst equals.
I felt very privileged for a start to be part of it, because for many years in the church I was completely ignored and the church was in denial. And to suddenly be part of such an important panel, interviewing people who in very senior safeguarding jobs, I felt it was a great privilege, and I was very proud of it. We're supposed to not be have pride, but I was proud to be on part of that, and that was so important to me, because what happened to me as a youngster has stayed with me all my life. I'm now in my 80s, and there were various forms of abuse that I went through, but one of the worst ones was the sexual abuse, and I've felt dirtied for the whole of my life since then. Being on the panel almost was sort of a cleansing thing. I wish I was more articulate, but it was I felt slightly cleansed about it. And that was a wonderful feeling.
I thought I'll never engage with that organisation ever, That was 2014. And here I am, 2024. So I've come on a long journey. And have I made a difference? Yes. I've been on survivor groups, and several people came back to me and said, thank you.
I would say the benefits would be that you will have a voice, you will meet other survivors, you will feel understood, you may feel all those things, you may feel supported, and you may find some kind of healing in the process, some kind of healing. What helped me personally, and I mentioned this to you before, was other people that came before me that, stood up and told their experiences, their stories and their challenges.
A report was made, so we were able to contribute to that report, and I got to give a presentation to the House of Bishops for 5 minutes, it's a lovely example of how survivors' voices are at the table.
So it's really important for me to be hearing from them. But if we're serious in the church about putting victims and survivors front and centre of what we do, I'm also looking for how the candidates in the interview respond to the whole panel. And so some of it is about recruiting for a new culture. And having a victim or survivor part of that panel for their expertise and their opinion is important, but actually having them in the room in that process is important, which I think can be true for all sorts of different roles, not just safeguarding roles. And I think we've probably started it particularly in relation to safeguarding roles and probably haven't thought enough about how we might develop this.
Essentially, my job says survivor engagement, which means there's just a label, survivors. And actually, the more people I engage with, the more I see that enormous range of opinions, that there's no assumption that survivors will think this on this topic.
What can we do together?
I'm absolutely convinced the church has got so much to learn.
Survivors are particularly important because they bring that experience and expertise that they have by the very nature of all that they've experienced in terms of abuse and also how the church has responded. So we have a lot to learn from survivors and victims. So that's really important as well. So this has to be something that we do together, using the we in a slightly different way.
Here we're talking about safeguarding. Remember, the safeguarding that is belonging to everybody, not only to church leaders, not to the survivors, but make us feel more safe between us.
I would say that to a survivor, if you want to get involved, if you want to engage in order to make the church safer, then get in touch with your local diocese, with the safeguarding team, or get in touch with the national safeguarding team and find out some more to explore how this could work for you. Don't be afraid to step away if it's not the good thing for you at the moment, but we would welcome you and we'd take you seriously.
I think that the work is so very, very important. And what happened to me was a very long time ago. My main focus on it now is that I don't want it to happen to any more young people because now I'm in my 80s, it's still impacting on me, very much so. I don't want that happening to any other young people. I want young people to enjoy their lives, not be traumatised like this. We're very privileged to have a bishop here, and thank you for joining us.
My best experience of survivor engagement has been getting to see real people, to meet people over enormous amounts of time and have these long meetings, but also to be able to be in the room today, to be able to offer people teas and coffees and just natter, and just to be able to spend time with people, to be able to see the subtleties and humanities of people means that you feel warmer about them, you want to ask more questions, you want to be curious. And I think that means that we can see each other as people and then sort of together head in the right direction.
Because the level of abuse that I suffered was very intense, it tends to make you feel almost as if you were the only survivor. So being here today is wonderful because I'm not the only survivor, we're all survivors, one way or another. And that's wonderful. And thank you, all of you, for listening to me.
If you need support after watching this video, please do not hesitate to contact Safe Spaces on 0300 303 1056. More information about survivor participation can be found on this Church of England's webpage, churchofengland.org/safeguarding/survivor-participation. With thanks to all those who collaborated and supported the making of this video.